Before we begin with our stories, I just want to take a little temperature check in the deli. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Shlomo HaMelech, or also known as King Solomon. Yeah, King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech. I think the best Hebrew name for a king I can think of, Shlomo. So what do we know about King Solomon? Well, usually we're taught that King Solomon, was the guy who built the first temple, right? The first temple in Jerusalem. He's known as a very, very wise king. He was very wealthy, very successful in all that he did. He was the son, of course, of David HaMelech, the King David, and they were the kings of the once united kingdom of Israel and Judea, right? So, something that we don't talk a lot about King Solomon, is that King Solomon was, for lack of a better word, maybe the first superhero that the Jewish people ever had, or the first comic book hero, really. So many of you may know that a couple Jewish guys from Cleveland invented Superman, right? So Superman is often thought of to be a Jewish superhero. In my opinion, though, King Solomon should really have that title. King Solomon was known to be able to speak to animals. King Solomon had a magic cloak that would allow him to fly across the lands at incredible speed. He had a magic ring. He was a very, very powerful guy. So, we've got all these stories in our Jewish tradition that are a little more fantastical than maybe you're used to. And a lot of times, the main character of those stories is Solomon, King Solomon. So, to start us off, I've got two little stories, two little fables of King Solomon to share with you all. The first goes like this. King Solomon was walking in his garden one day. Now, he loved to take walks in his garden because, of course, he could speak to animals. He would walk around. He would hear what the caterpillars were saying to each other. Maybe he'd chime in, offer some advice. He would see some birds and he would commune with them. But this time, Solomon was walking through his gardens and he heard two little birds chirping something very disturbing to him. Now he got closer and listened closely, and what he hears is a male bird and a female bird. And the male bird is saying to the female bird, "Oh, my love, you are as beautiful as Solomon is wise. You are as kind as Solomon is powerful. For you, and for you alone, I'm going to go into Solomon's throne room, into his tower where the throne room sits, and I'm going to bring it crashing to the ground. Just for you, my love." Now, Solomon overhears this and is very disturbed. Not only did this sound absolutely ridiculous to him, how could a tiny little bird bring down his great tower? But in addition to that, Solomon was the king, and he believed that he was to be respected, and this was disrespect at its highest. So Solomon goes back to his throne room, and he's brooding over what this bird says. When all of a sudden, the bird that had previously promised that he would bring Solomon's tower crashing down appeared at his window. And King Solomon says, How dare you show your face here? How dare you bring your little beak into my throne room? You who said you were going to tear down my tower. And the little bird is scared. And he says, please, King, you have to understand. I'm in love with this female bird. I love her so much. I would do anything for her. And you see, well, you know how it is when you're young and in love. You say things to the other person that are impossible, right? You tell them, you pretend how great you are in the hopes that they'll like you. And eventually they'll come to realize maybe that you're not so great, but by then, too late, you're stuck. And King Solomon says, "Ah, yes, I know the ways of young love." Okay, that's fair enough, bird. You be gone now. Go back to your lovely bird lady, and I'll pretend this whole thing never happened. The bird thanks the king profusely, flies back to the garden, and his ladybird says, "Oh my gosh, I heard such yelling coming from the king's tower. Are you okay? How is it that you're still alive?" And the young bird says to his lover, "Well, you see, I went over there and I told Solomon that I was going to tear down his tower. And he was so terrified that he made me promise I wouldn't. All for you, my love." And that is the day that Solomon remembered what it was to be in love at a young age. The end. So this is another love story. It has to do with Solomon, but he's not quite the central character. So Solomon was once throwing a great feast, as he was wont to do. For weeks and weeks, Jerusalem celebrated. Everyone drank the best wine and ate the best food. It was really amazing. And King Solomon, being a little bit of a boastful guy, gets up one day at his feast and says, "I can prove to you all, without a doubt, that love can conquer any power on the face of the earth. Love can conquer any power on the face of the earth." He says, to prove it, I'm going to take my beautiful young daughter, Keziah, and I'm going to take her to this faraway island. And he does that. And of course, Solomon, right, like we talked about, has this magical flying cloak. So he flies his daughter to the island and drops her off. He goes back. He flies some workers over. He flies stone. He flies wood and mortar. And over time, his workers on this island build a tower. A tower whose top reached into the heavens. So tall was it. Now, this tower didn't have a door, didn't have any stairs. If anyone knows the story of Rapunzel, it was pretty similar to that. Keziah, King Solomon's daughter, was placed in a room at the top of the tower with only a small window with which to look out into the world. And Solomon says, "I will prove to you all, love will conquer any obstacle. Even if it's a tower that's smooth as an egg, right? You can't climb up the side of this tower. There's no door, there's no stairs, there's no ladder. But love will conquer all, and my daughter will be married." Now the daughter ends up waiting a little longer than she expected. Far away across the sea, a young man was preparing to strike out into the world and make his fortune. Now, he grew up very poor. He was a very poor man, but his family was very tight-knit. They loved each other deeply. And as he was about to board this ship to go off to seek his fortune in foreign lands that only he could imagine in his wildest dreams, his mother hands him a little bag. In that little bag is the most beautiful ruby he has ever seen. A ruby this big. A ruby that, were it sold, could feed a family for years. And he says to his mother, "Mother, why have you hid this from us? You know we don't have much. Why didn't you sell this ruby?" And she says, "Well, we always had enough, and I wanted to save it for you. But do me this favor. Whatever you do, you can do whatever you wish as you seek your fortune, but please, don't sell the ruby." The son agrees, and he boards the ship, and he sails far away, far away. Eventually, the ship runs into rough water, which eventually turns into a great storm, the likes that had never been seen since the days of Noah even. The man is barely able to escape with his life. Floating in the vast ocean, he clutches with one arm onto a plank that keeps him afloat, and in his other hand, he grasps the bag that holds the treasured ruby. After what seemed like days and days, the young man washes up on a foreign island. The plants are strange. The air smells slightly sweet. He's never seen such a place so beautiful, so exotic. And off in the distance, he spies a tower, of course. Because remember, we still have King Solomon's daughter trapped up in this tower. As the young man is walking, trying to find some shelter for the days ahead, a snake jumps out of a bush, bites his hand, and gobbles the ruby up, bag and all. Now the man has nothing. He's crash-landed on this island. Food, who knows what kind of food there is. Water, well, you can't exactly drink ocean water. He had left his home, left his family, who he loved so much, to find his fortune, to be foiled completely. So he sits down on the ground, and he watches as the snake begins to glow. And the snake begins to grow and glow a ruby red. He decides to follow the snake. It slithers off as it grows towards the great tower. At the bottom of the tower, it begins to wrap its way around, up and up and up. And the young man follows the serpent, and as it winds up the tower, the young man walks up it like stairs. The giant serpent places its head within this window. Hiccups. The ruby falls out onto the ground, and the princess and this young man are left standing, looking at each other, with this giant ruby between them. It was at that point that Solomon descended on his magic cloak. And of course, he had brought all his friends along because he had to prove himself right, and he had to have witnesses. And he brings his friends, he brings the court over and says, "See, I told you. The strongest power in the world is love. Love will conquer all." And Kezia, the princess, and this young man from a foreign land had a beautiful wedding, and the ruby was set into her crown. And in the days ahead, they had many children and lived happily ever after. The end.